computer. There we go. All right. So yes, our topic is building wealth using your debts and expenses. Many of us here want to get out of our debts, but we also not just want to go to zero, right? Zero balance in terms of our debts. We also want to build assets. We want to build cash flow. We want to build up our savings and that kind of thing. How can we do that? And like I was just saying before we hit the record button, this is something that can actually be done no matter where you are in the world. You're going to be able to do this if you have the discipline, and it's not that difficult, but if you have the discipline to follow the steps that I'm going to share with you today, it's actually possible. Okay, it's actually possible to do that, to use your debts and expenses to build wealth. And you want to turn that around. Big word tonight. The main concept that you want to think about is cash flow. Right? It's all about cash flow. So we want to change the flow of cash. Usually, for those of us who have lots of debt and expenses, usually our cash is flowing away from us. So what we want to do is we want to change that so that rather than cash flowing away from us, we want to turn it around and have the cash flow come towards us, back into our bank accounts, back into our lives. Right. So that's what how do we do that? That's what we're going to look at, some practical steps on how we can do that specifically for our situation. I'll give you some examples of that. I'll give you actually a specific example. We're going to actually use some numbers, based on some realistic, things like, for example, a credit card, a loaded credit card and an auto loan as well. We're going to take a look at that. And of course, that's going to be applicable on a larger scale. And this can also be used whether you can actually apply what I'm going to share with you to your business and also to your ministry, right? So, Kingdompreneurs is about men and women of faith who are, wanting to bring the kingdom of God into the marketplace. And churches, ministries, and Christian businessmen and women can actually use this for those organizations and actually create positive cash flow and not just keep asking for money. This is the thing that I have a burden with is a lot of Christian ministries and Christian organizations. They're so used to begging for money, asking for money, help us out, and being thought. You think of when you're part of that organization, you kind of think of yourself as a glorified beggar. Like I look at my missionary friends who have committed their lives to Christ and have decided to uproot themselves from the United States or from Canada to live in a different part of the world for the sake of the gospel. And one of the things they have to do on a regular basis is they got to campaign and go to churches that know them and some churches that don't even know them and just ask for money. And I think that there's got to be a better way to do that. Same with businesses who struggle with paying your taxes every year, with paying operational expenses, and for taking advantage of opportunities that come your way. If you had the capital to do that, that would be awesome. You need capital to fund ministries. You need capital to fund your business. You need capital to retire. You need capital to take care of all your expenses. So that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the cash flow when the cash flow of your capital that you have either in your personal finances or your business or your ministry. All right. So we're going to nail down some very, very basic things first and foremost. How would you pay for these things? If you wanted to buy a new car or a used car, by the way, I suggest that you never buy a new car. Always buy a used car, because the moment you drive that new car off of the dealership, you must remove 20% of the value of that car, even if you were just to drive around the block. If you bought a brand new car off a dealership and you drove it around the block and decided to sell it back to the dealership, they will give you the most, if they would even give it to you, is less 20%. You'd only get 80% of that car, even if you barely drove it. And the reason for that is just it is a what do you call it? It's an asset that is losing value the moment you drive it away. So best thing to do, buy a car that is, a year old, 2 years old. I drive a car, a great car that I'm driving, my Hyundai Santa Fe. It's a 2016, and it's wonderful. How would you pay for your rent? How are you paying for your rent, your mortgage? How about education costs? Some of you might have some student loans that you're still paying off, or maybe you're thinking about the tuition and education costs for your children. How do you pay for vacations? Jen and I were just talking about going to Disney World, and what to see over there and how much that is. Those kinds of things are not getting, cheaper and cheaper. They're getting more and more expensive. And of course, nice vacations. We'd love to be able to see other parts of the world. How do you pay for that? How about home renovations and repairs? If you have your own home and you need to repair, let's say you need I had a faucet that was broken down in my laundry room, and it would not stop. It was broken literally, and the water just kept gushing out. We found it like that one day, and it's like, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? I had to shut all the water off in my house, and if I do that, there's no water up in the washrooms, right? The comfort rooms in our house. But it was wasting a lot of liters and liters and hundreds of liters of water was being wasted if I left that on. But I had to pay someone to do that, and I had to finance it because I didn't realize how expensive it was to get a plumber to come in and to replace the thing. Thank God it didn't take very long, but I finally paid it off. But imagine the extra interest that I paid on that. And it just disappoints me so much to think that I wasn't prepared for that. These home repairs and home renovations really, they add up. How do you pay for these kinds of things? And really, when you think about it, there's only two ways that we really pay for things. We either use cash or we use credit. That's really the only way we do that, right? And the credit I would include like borrowing, like using a loan, and then that requires credit, and you're going to eventually pay that loan off. There's cash or credit. And this is what it would look like if you were to create a picture of using cash. This is what it would look like, right? Basically, you're going to save up and save up and save up until you have enough money to buy whatever it was. Maybe it's a car, maybe it's the renovation that you need or something. But a lot of people are afraid of getting into debt. So what do? They say, no debt. We're not going to put it on the credit cards. We're not going to get a loan. We're going to pay cash for everything. And what they do is they do that. They take the time. It takes time to build up that amount of capital, amount of cash. And then eventually they have enough to go on that vacation. They have enough to do that renovation. They have enough, to pay off whatever. And they pay that off. And then they go back down to zero. Right. And then now the next thing they have to save up for is going to take them time to build that up, to build that up, to build that up. So the problem with paying cash is, yes, you stay out of debt. However, it takes a long time to save up for something. Can you imagine now, especially here, I live in the Greater Toronto area. Can you imagine, how long will it take you to save up if you wanted to pay for a house here, either here in Toronto or in Vancouver, in cash? No one does that anymore, right? It's impossible to do that because of the housing prices here. My brother, who lives in Vancouver, he actually works for the TV and film industry, and he makes a lot of money. I would say he makes six figures, but he tells me, he says, I may make a lot of money, but I can't even afford a home. I can't afford to buy my own house here in Vancouver because it's way too expensive. So it's like, wow. Do you think that prices for houses are going to go up or they're going to go down? Likely they're going to keep going up, right? So this is the challenge of paying things in cash. Now, for smaller things, yeah, you could do that. You could get away with that. But for things like a car, renovation, stuff like that, it will take you a long time to save up to pay cash for those things, right? The other thing too is aside from paying cash, you can also use credit. Now, credit is kind of like the mirror of, when you look at visually, it's kind of a mirror version of cash because it's upside down. With using credit, you actually go into debt first. So you're borrowing someone else's money to pay for that, and then you have to pay it back. So immediately you go into the hole, right? You go into the red, and then you pay it back over time, right? With cash, it was saving over time. Here, it's paying it off over time. And the challenge with this, with using credit, is that you really end up being the slave of the lender. In other words, they determine and control the terms in which you are going to pay. First of all, they're gonna control, how much they're gonna charge you for borrowing their money, right? That's called interest. So we're gonna be charged interest. That's the cost of borrowing money. Second, they're gonna tell you this is how much you have to pay every month, and you can't control that. You have to pay that every month once those terms are set. And this is for how long you're going to do that. This is how long it's going to take till you pay off that debt. And what happens? If you don't pay that, if you miss a payment, or if you fail to pay that off, you get hit. Your credit score gets hit. Collection companies start calling after you. Your ability to borrow money is affected in the future because this is going to be on your record, right? You're going to have a bad reputation. So these are the challenges of using credit. It's either cash or credit. But here's the thing. Everyone accepts this, don't they? The whole world basically says that's how things are. That's how we do things. We use either cash or credit. What if there was a different way? This is what I want to share with you tonight. There could be a different way for paying for things. In a way, what if there was a way that you could pay things off, and in the end, you actually have more money than you started with? Wouldn't that be worth learning? Taking an hour to learn how that works. Imagine if you paid something off, and instead of going down to zero, you end up having more than you actually started with. That would be something. Now, here's another challenge with paying, using credit, is the cost. We talked about the interest rate and that kind of thing. We talked about how much it costs to borrow money. Take a look at this. Take a look at how this works. Let's take a look at 3 items. Let's say you buy a car, $30,000 car at 8.5%. You have a credit card. You use it, $10,000 at 14%. You have a mortgage. You bought a house. You had to borrow $200,000 at 6%. So these are what your loan items are. Your payments per month on the car would be about $594. Your credit card, you have to pay about $250 a month, and your mortgage is around $1,200 a month. Now, when we talk about this, when we talk about financing things, one of the big issues that we have when we talk to people, when we talk to one another about it, is what interest rate did you get, right? If you say, well, I just renegotiated I renewed my mortgage. Really? What interest rate did you get? Oh, I just bought a car. Really? What interest rate did you get? We're so concerned about the interest rate. In this case, for example, these are realistic interest rates, right? For a car, 8.5%, credit card, 14%. Some have, 24.9%. Mortgage at 6%, realistic kind of things. Okay, but when we look at that, we look at the interest rate. What we don't really see is the volume of interest. So what does it mean, 8.5%? What would be the interest cost on a car loan of $30,000 where you're making $594 a month? Well, the interest cost is $175. Of the $594, 175 of that is interest alone. That represents 30% of what you're paying out, right? With your credit card, if you're not able to pay it off like within the month, and you're putting in $250, to pay off your credit card, $10,000, $100 of that is your interest cost. That's 40% of what you're paying actually is just to service that, right? Just to pay the interest off of that. And imagine in your mortgage, you got a $200,000 mortgage, you're paying $1,200. Of that $1,200, the majority of that, $1,000 goes to interest. Actually, the first 14, 15 years of a long-term mortgage, a 25, 30-year mortgage, goes towards interest only. And what we see here is that $1,000 out of that $1,200 represents 83% volume of interest. This is the thing that we should be worried about, not necessarily the interest rate, right? Imagine what does this look like? Well, if you add it all up, you're looking at $1,275 of interest a month. This is just the interest. You're paying $15,000 a year just on interest alone on these three items. And if you pay the house off, right, after 20 years, you've paid $306,000 of interest. So that's the $200,000 principal plus $306,000 of interest. So you paid $506,000 for this house. What question? How many houses did you buy? Right? You only bought one house, but you paid for two. Is there a way that we can recover that? Is there some way where we can avoid paying this interest? How can we do that? And what we're going to talk about tonight actually discusses that and brings that up. So here's the problem with paying cash or credit. In the end, whether you pay cash or credit, you end up at the same place every single time. You end up at zero, right? You end up at the zero line. When you pay cash, once you've got enough to pay for it, boom. For example, my daughter, she went to Korea with her friends. She used the TFSA to save up for that. Once she went to Korea, she had a great time. She went for like 2 weeks, but money's gone, right? Now, if she wants to do it again with her husband, now she's married. Now they're waiting because they haven't been able to take their honeymoon because they want to go to Amsterdam. They want to go to Europe. They want to go visit places. They want to go to Barcelona and Italy and Rome and visit all those places as well as Amsterdam. They want to go to those places, but they have to save up for it because she's used up that money. She went back to zero. Now she's got to take the time to build that up again, right? With debt, once you paid off, for example, I felt really good when I finally paid off that 1 year. It was a 1 year thing basically that I had to pay for the what's it called? The plumbing, right? I had that water problem in my laundry room, and it took me a year to pay that off. But it felt good. I got a notification, you're done. Yay, feels good. But that's money gone, right? And plus the interest that I paid on that. So back to zero. That's the problem with cash or credit. But I know that cash and credit are so ubiquitous in the world. It's so common that you wonder, well, what other way? How else can you possibly pay for things without going to zero? Is there a way to do that? So what we're talking about here, remember the number one big word that we're thinking about today is cash flow. So the problem that we're having here is a cash flow issue. There are three classes, right? Three classes of cash flow. There's the poor, the middle class, and the rich. And when you look at it, this is what the cash flow for the poor basically is like this. They get a salary, they pay their expenses. That's it. No savings, nothing else like that. They basically go from paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth. This is common for a lot of people. I know a lot of people. We've experienced this ourselves where we're living paycheck to paycheck. Money in, money out. That's it. No reserve, no savings, nothing like that. During that time when you're in that state, if you're in that phase of your life, it's like, will we ever be able to buy a home? Will we ever be able to buy a car? Will we ever be able to have our own thing? Are we going to be bussing it the whole time? Or are we going to be renting the whole time? Right? You wonder about that because you don't know how you can change your cash flow. You don't know how to get out of that situation. Now, if you get a better job and you get a better salary, that works really well. But you're actually in the same situation because basically what you're doing now is those in the middle class who are making, better than minimum wage. If you're making like, $50,000, $60,000, a year, now what you're doing is you've got this extra money. But what we tend to do with that as middle class people is that we tend to buy liabilities. We tend to buy, for example, a home, a car. We have student loans we're paying off with credit cards. And a lot of people are in this situation. The majority of people are actually in this middle class situation. And so out of those liabilities, then expenses, and again, money in, money out. Maybe not living paycheck to paycheck, but not having much of a savings, not having much of an emergency fund because of the liabilities. The money that they have is being used to service these expenses. And so this is where we find ourselves. This is probably why you're interested in this topic as well, is how can I use my debts and expenses that I have? How can I turn that around? How can I make the cash flow change directions so that I can keep having money in? That's the thing that we're trying to do, and what I'm going to show you in a little bit here. Okay, so to understand how we can turn it around, one of the things we need to understand is about compounding growth, right? So this green line represents compounding growth. And the thing about this compounding growth is that it's really divided into two parts, part A and part B, side A, side B. And most people, the poor and middle class, they kind of live on side A. They live on side A because side A is all about small gains, little gains, right? Because with compounding growth, as you see here, if you look at the green line really takes off later on in time. It takes time for the compounding effect to happen, right? And most of us are kind of in urgency. We're kind of living in urgency. So we don't have the patience to wait for that to happen. I'm going to show you a way that is possible, to have something that is continually growing, and so that you can take advantage of compounding growth and the time that it takes to do that. Side B is where the wealthy live. Side B is where the big gains come in because there's time, because you're allowing compounding growth to take off, really. You're allowing compounding growth to take the time to really give the returns back to you, right? So that's why middle class are in A and the wealthy are really in side B. Where do you want to live? Where do you want your money to be? On the side A or side B? How can we make it live on side B? How can we do that? It's going to take some understanding and it's going to take some discipline to do that. All right. So why is this so important? The reason why this is important, is there another way besides cash and besides credit? Is there another way that we can pay for things? Yes, there is, and it's called leveraging. Okay, leveraging. How do you leverage? Well, what you do is you establish an asset that continues to grow, what we call uninterrupted compound growth. Okay, so uninterrupted compound growth, that line, that green line is unbroken. And what we do is we actually borrow against that asset, not from it. So there's a big difference. There's a big difference between borrowing from the asset versus borrowing against the asset. Here's the difference. For example, if you are a homeowner, you own a home, and you get, for example, if you get a home equity loan, what are you doing? You are borrowing from the asset, right? Because what you end up doing, for example, if you have $100,000 of equity in your home, and you get a home equity loan of $50,000, that $50,000 there becomes a $50,000 lien against your home. In other words, they can take your house if you don't pay back that $50,000. So you've actually taken $50,000 out of the home to use, right? That's borrowing from the asset. Your home was an asset. You're borrowing from it. But if you get a home equity line of credit, for example, you're actually, what you're doing there, instead of borrowing from it, you're borrowing against it. You're using it as collateral, using the money, and then paying it back. And this is what I'm going to show you here. On this screen here, what you're seeing is how leveraging is done by the wealthy. They have this asset that is growing uninterrupted. They don't touch it, but they borrow against it, and they repay that loan back. Now, I know that that's a big thing to come around. I mean, one of the biggest hurdles that people have about this strategy is that they say, how do you use debt? Aren't you going into debt when you borrow, from your asset, or you borrow against your asset? Yes, you are. But how is that any better than using credit? Here, the one thing, and I'm going to do a different seminar about this, like differently after this seminar. So I'm not going to go deeply into this, but let me show you what happens with that. Because you have this asset that is growing uninterrupted, right? You have this constant, you're never losing any money here. You're borrowing from it, and it's worth paying back because look what happens. Every time you pay back, do you ever go back to zero? No. Your money has not stopped growing even after you borrowed against it, right? When you pay it back, you actually have more money than when you first started, right? You can see it visually here. And we can actually show that through illustrations, right? So we can show that through Excel sheets and that kind of thing. We can show that, but that's not the purpose of this. This is just giving you an idea. When we take that topic on, we're going to talk about cash flow management using a specific strategy. I'll discuss that more in detail. But this is what leveraging is about. It's about establishing an asset in your life that is growing steadily, and it doesn't have to be like a lottery windfall. It can be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%, every year steadily, right? It can even be as little as 6%, steadily growing without interrupting it, without borrowing it, without breaking it, without taking any money out, and using that as collateral to finance the things that you want to buy. Okay, so that's what leveraging is. And that's what the rich do. When you take a look at the cash flow of the rich, what's happening? How do they pay for things? They take assets, they use their money, their income to buy more assets. And that gives them those assets like rental, for example, rental properties, stocks and bonds, intellectual properties, for example, right? Like books and stuff like that. They write books and stuff like that. So what ends up, they get income from those assets, right? They get rental income from their rental real estate. They get dividends from stocks and bonds. They get royalties from their intellectual property, and that becomes income. So when a rich person wants to go and buy, let's say they want to buy a car, rather than just taking it out of their checking account or their bank account and paying cash for the car, let's say $50,000 for the car, what they'll do is first they'll get an asset, they'll buy an asset and build that up and make that asset be able to produce that $50,000 and use that to buy the car. Now, what happens? Once the car is bought, is he at zero? No, because he still has the asset, and the asset is going to continue to make money, right? And so what happens, you have this never-ending flow of money going into the income of the rich. And this is why the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And why the gap between the middle class and the rich is increasing is because the middle class does not understand how money works in the world. Instead, what do they end up doing? They end up complaining that the rich, it's not fair that the rich have these advantages. Well, the only advantage the rich have really is the knowledge of how money works. And this is something that you and I, everyone, can have that knowledge and use it for our advantage. Okay? So what do the rich do? They get an asset, right? And they use it to create income, and that's what they use to pay for their expenses. And this is what it really looks like. Uninterrupted compound interest, and you're deploying money from there, right? You're deploying the money. You're sending your capital out to do what, to build businesses, to invest, to fund ministries, right? To pay off your debts, that kind of thing. That's what you're doing. Is there an asset that can give us all of this? It gives us control over our finances. Is it liquid enough so that we could use it and not have to wait for years before we can use it? Is there uninterrupted compounding growth? Is there an asset that is zero risk, that it's not an investment? I'm not talking about an investment. I'm talking about an asset that is steadily growing with zero risk. It's also tax advantage. Is there something that is also inflation resistant? Yes, there is. There is an asset that we can get, that we can use to do that. And it's called a specially designed and engineered participating whole life policy. Okay. This is both a product and a tool. And what I'm talking about is not as a product, but as a tool. We use this tool because you have to put your money somewhere, put it in this, because this acts like a supercharged savings account is what ends up happening. Okay, not going to get into a lot of detail of that. I am going to do a different webinar on how to use this, but know that there is some place to put that. The question is, how do we put this into practice? And that's what now we're going to get into. How do you use your debts and expenses to create wealth? And where does this fit in? To be honest with you, I'll be very honest with you, you actually don't even need this whole life policy to begin with, to be honest with you. You can start turning around your cash flow today. You can start doing that without having to get that policy that I was talking about. Okay, so this is where high value for you can actually happen, because this is the practical stuff. At the end, I'm going to give you a list of the principles that we're using to make this happen. So let's take a look at this. So what happens? Let's say we have a car loan, right? And sorry, hold on. Let me just fix this, because the video, I see you guys and it's blocking my view of the slide. Let me just put it that way. Here we go. All right, so $594, you got a $30,000 car loan, and you're paying $594 a month for it. Okay, that's one expense. Okay, you have it at 8.5%, but you also have a credit card where you've got $10,000 on it, and you're paying $250 a month. That's minimum. You're going to pay that every month. Okay. Now, without changing any of those numbers. Oh, by the way, the interest rate on that credit card is 14%. And I mentioned earlier, what's the big deal? What is the big word that we're really, anchoring everything on? Cash flow. So right now, in this situation, in your situation here, your cash flow is going away from you. Your money is leaving you to pay for these things, right? It's going away. We want to change that so that your cash flow goes the other way. We want the cash to go the other way into our bank account. How can we do that? Well, one of the things that you need to do, now I know that many of the people that are on this webinar today, some of you have come from my Kingdompreneur group, so you are men and women of faith who already practice something called tithing, right? You're already used to setting aside a certain percentage of your income, and you give that to your church, or you give that to a ministry. So what I'm going to challenge you to do is, aside from paying your tithe, aside from giving your tithe, not paying it, but giving it, I would say that you need to learn the number one, this is probably the first principle that you have to put into practice in your personal finances. And that is, you must pay yourself first. Pay yourself first. What most people do is they will pay all their bills first, and then whatever's left over, you might put it in savings. And sometimes there's nothing left over, so you don't have a savings. But the key to building your wealth, the very number one key, is to take a percentage, usually 10% of your income, and you set it aside and you pay yourself first for you. Now, as men and women of faith, sure, give your tithe to the Lord first, but set aside that 10% and pay yourself first. Pay yourself as well. If you want to call it pay yourself second, that's fine. You want to pay the Lord first, that's fine. Pay yourself second. Next, you need to do that, right? You got to pay yourself first before you pay off those bills, or else you'll never, ever save. All right. So let's say you're making $100,000 a year. I'm just going to use these round numbers so it's easier to calculate. But let's say, this could be true if you're only making $50,000. This could be true if you're only making $35,000. But let's say $100,000, and you're saving 10% of that income, so that's $10,000 that you are going to save. And what you're going to do is you're going to put it into a dedicated bank account, something separate from your checking and savings. All of that, this is going to be something that you're going to use for it's like a wealth account. What you're going to do is you're going to put that 10%. Now, you might not be able to do it all in one shot. You may have to do it, put $1,000 in every month, or $800 or $900 in every month to do that, so that at the end of the year you have $10,000. as long as you're setting aside that 10% to be able to pay yourself, right? You want to put it into this dedicated bank account. Once you have that, remember, you're already doing this. You're already paying $594 a month. You're already paying $250 a month. Once you have that $10,000 in your dedicated bank account, you're going to use that now to look at what are your lowest debts that you have, lowest debts and expenses that you have that you can pay off. Well, in this case, you've got your credit card, you've got a $10,000 loan on it. You can take that $10,000 and completely pay that $10,000 credit card off completely. Okay, so that's what you do. And when you do that, here's what happens. You get rid of that debt. You still have the credit card. You can still use it, but you paid that off. And now, right, and here's where the discipline comes in. Now what you do is you take that $250 a month, and instead of paying that $250 to the credit card company, you pay it back to yourself. If you pay yourself, you're already used to paying $250 a month, but you've taken care of that credit card. You paid that off already. It's gone, right? Now that $250 that you're so used to paying anyways, you pay it to yourself into your dedicated bank account, and after 1 year, you've got $3,000. That year later, what's going to happen? The year later, you're gonna have another $10,000, right? Because you're still taking 10% of your income, and you're paying yourself first. And now, at the second year, you're going to have $13,000. See, now this is building wealth. What are you going to do with that $13,000? You're going to take that $13,000. You're going to pay down that car loan. You've got a $30,000 car loan there, and it's going to take you about 2 years, 2.5 years to pay that off. So you take that 13 and you pay that off, and then the next year another 13 and you pay that off. And what ends up happening? You take that $594 that you're already used to paying, and you add it. You get rid of the car payments, and you start changing the flow of that, and you pay the $594 that you're used to paying already. Nothing has changed in terms of your cash flow. Nothing except the direction. You haven't spent any more money, right? You haven't gotten any loans or anything like that, or anything. You haven't gotten to any more debt than you already are. You're just changing where the money goes, right? And now that $594 a month times 12 in a year, that's $7,128 going back into your bank account. What's that at the end of the year? And you've got that $10,000 again. You're putting in that 10% that you're paying yourself, becomes in that year $20,128. And you've got the car, you paid the car off, you're done, and your credit card is paid off, and you've got that $20,128 sitting in that bank account. Now, here's where that supercharged savings account comes into play. You don't want to leave $20,000 inside a regular bank account, because your bank account is not going to give you any kind of beneficial return, right? Maybe 1%, maybe less, right? If at all, that they're going to give you. And when you compare that to inflation, you're already losing money. I read yesterday that inflation has finally gone down to like 3.5%, which is great. It's near where, around 3%, near where the Bank of Canada wants it to be. Okay, so that's good. What does that mean, though? It still means that if you're getting 1% at the bank, every year your money loses value, 2% of value every year. So you're losing money if you keep money in the bank. You have to keep your money somewhere. So where would you put it? Where would it be the most advantageous for you to put it? Best place to put it is right here in a specially designed whole life policy. You treat this like a bank. Okay, you treat it like a bank, and you put your money in there, right? And that, why do we want to put it in there? We want it in there because these kinds of policies provide guaranteed interest of 3 to 4%, and they have an annual dividend. Right now, the dividend rate is 6.25% in most of these companies. 6.25%, right? So now the minimum is 3%. So you can't lose because you're still making more than what the bank is making, right? Now, as you continue, you paid off your debts here. You've started having positive cash flow. Now you can fund this whole life policy, and you keep putting this in every year. And as you grow this up, you can start to use it to buy things so that you don't have to pay the extra interest and you don't have to go into debt for it. So how do you do that? You access your money through a policy loan that you put into they deposit it in a few days, they put it into your dedicated bank account, and then you start paying for things out of that. But instead of paying monthly, where you pay interest, right? You pay cash for everything. You completely pay for everything. So best of both worlds, right? You pay for the whole thing or big chunks of it so that you don't have to pay the volume of interest that we talked about earlier, right? Now, once you've paid your debts off, what can you do? What you do then is this is the rhythm. Pay off the debt balances like completely, but you redirect the monthly payments. That's really the rhythm of it. Pay off the debt balances and then redirect the monthly payments back into your account, and then use that to pay off the loans that you had from that once the debts are paid. Now you might be wondering, now when we do a policy loan, is there interest there? There is. It's 6.05%. And you might be wondering, why would I pay interest on that? Because look, here's what you're doing. When you were paying the $594 a month for the car, you were paying 8.5% interest. When you were paying $250 a month on your credit card, you were paying 14%. So now, because you've gotten rid of that and you put all that money back in, the same amount that you were paying to that, you've actually recovered 22.5% of interest, and you're paying it there. Now, look, if you've recovered 25.5% of interest, 6.05% is nothing for a policy loan. It's irrelevant. That rate is irrelevant because of how much you're saving on this other side. That makes sense? So this is how you can turn your debts and your expenses. You can turn it around and use it to build wealth by changing the cash flow. Now, if you remember, we didn't even have that whole life policy to begin with. We didn't even have that yet. And you still were able to change that cash flow. But the real advantage and the real wealth is being built when why that specially designed whole life policy? That's that uninterrupted compounding growth asset that we talked about earlier, so that it's continuing to grow and grow and grow, whether you use it or not, right? So that's the basic gist of it. I hope that you picked up on some things and you learned some things. Here's the review of the key principles. You open a new separate bank account, you pay yourself first 10% from your salary, no matter what. You could do this with whatever level of pay you have. You fully pay off your debts from smallest to largest. Once you've accumulated enough there, you fully pay off your debts from smallest to largest. And you change your cash flow by continuing to make those payments, but rather than to the debtors or your creditors, you pay it to yourself. And you continue, right? You continue to pay that until all your debts are paid. And then the next step to really bring it to the next level, create your supercharged bank account through a participating whole life policy. And then you start taking control of the banking function in your life. And as I said before, I'm going to be offering a separate webinar regarding how to use a participating whole life policy as what we call the infinite banking or cash flow management using whole life. If you want to know more and would like to see how this could work for you, and especially for those of you who are living in Canada, especially, I can offer this to you. You can book an appointment with me here on my Calendly.com. You use this link, okay? Just type that into your browser, the URL address, and that'll take you to my calendar and you'll see my availability. If you'd like to discuss this more, just choose 30 minutes or 1 hour and we can discuss it and see what your next steps are. And if you want to have a conversation about it, book that, but you can also send me a message here at mwani@Archeo FS. Archeo stands for the Archeo Financial Services. So archeofs.com. I'll get that email and I'll get back to you and we can continue that conversation. All right. So at this point, the presentation is over, but I would love to take any questions if you have them from what you've heard so far. Hey, Doreen. Hey, Agnes.
They're there, hey?
Robert, my friend, good to see you.
So I just want, Mark.
Yes,
I
Agnes.
just want to say the interest rate is actually 6.50.
Did they change it? Because when I checked with Equitable, it was 6.05.
No, it was 6.25 and they changed. Oh no, because I asked for a loan and I was given 6.7.
Okay.
And it's because it's with the UL, but I called them and I said, they said it's supposed to be 6.5 for whole life insurance.
Okay, even if it was 6.5, it's still irrelevant because you're saving 25%,
exactly.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for the update.
No worries. But does it say 6.05 on the internet, on the website?
No, I called them up. I asked for the rate, and they said it was 6.05.
And Liz clarified that it is 6.5 because I was saying 6.7 because that's what they were telling me, but I didn't realize that a UL interest is different. It's higher than a whole life interest.
Right.
Yeah, that's why Liz had to correct me.
Yeah.
And so it's 6.5, not 6.7.
Okay, 6.5 it is.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Any other comments or questions?
So, Mark,
Robert.
this is an interesting concept. So as far as using a whole life policy as an investment, there's no point that becomes an issue. Because
no, it doesn't, because we're not using it as an investment. We're properly using the whole life. We never, one thing I did mention this, but I didn't emphasize it enough. The whole life policy is not really an investment. We don't look at it that way. It's just a place to store your money until you find an investment that you want, right? But it's properly using it in a way that you can use it to save money. People have been using the whole life policy for savings for 150 years. Right? That's what they use it for. It used to be that before, like early pre-1979, people thought of, North America, people thought of using whole life as a savings tool. So the insurance companies have no problem using it that way. In fact, some of the marketing material from the insurance companies actually have that in there. So yeah, there's no issue. I know what you're talking about. I know that you don't want to get the same trouble that with the UL before. That won't be an issue with this at all.
And then how much of your so you have to build up your sorry, I forgot the word, just your base. You have to save up a base in order to start using the collateral loan.
Right. Well, yeah. The great thing about the whole life is that even in year one, it's liquid, but it depends on how much you put in there because you can borrow up to 90%, right, of what you've got there. There's no like surrender fees or anything like that to do that. So as long as you have enough money there, like for example, if you're only putting $100 a month into a whole life policy, you're not going to be able to borrow $5,000 the first year. Obviously, you can borrow what you put in. But then it grows. Eventually, over time, it's exponentially growing. So that's where the advantage is, right? And especially if you're paying that back and it keeps growing like that and compounding, big leverage, big advantage. And also the other thing that a lot of people don't think of because they still think of the whole life policy as kind of an investment is that there's no risk involved. There's no up and down, right? Like with an investment, it's up and down. It's tied to the market. Some days go up, some days go down. Whatever goes up must come down. Whatever goes down must go up, kind of thing. That is actually not true with the whole life policy because it always goes up. It never goes down. They're contractually bound to make money, right? So when an insurance company contracts with a client for a whole life policy, there's a minimum guarantee that the money will grow. That guarantee is 3%, 3 or 4%. So depending on the insurance company. And what happens is you will never get less than that. It will never go zero. You'll never go negative. And if you pick the right company, you usually want to pick a company that has a good track record, that has paid out a dividend, without interruption for the past 100 years or so. And there are companies here in Canada that have done that, right? They have paid out for over 100 years. They've paid out their dividend. So, good deal, I think. That's also what keeps it from being an investment, is that there's no risk element involved. Whereas with investments, there's always a risk involved with an investment. Yeah.
And another question I was gonna ask about and how easy is it, to get a collateral and then pay it back? Like it's just a matter of because it doesn't work like a bank account where you just put money in the bank account. How does it work as far as
Paying it off, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, getting the loan is quite easy, actually. It's just a request. There's no credit checks. There's no employment, proof or anything like that. You make a request. There's a form that you fill out and sign. And within a week or 2 weeks, the money is in your bank account. And then, so they'll check to see if you've got the money to be able to borrow that, and then they'll confirm it and then put it in your bank account. Paying it off, you have the choice. There is no structured, it's not a structured loan. So there's no amounts that you have to pay every month. If let's say, for example, you may decide, I'm going to pay this loan off, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use my income tax return. I'm going to use that every year and just dump whatever I get from my income tax return. I'm going to do that. I'm going to put it in there, right? You could do it that way, or there are ways to do it as well, where you can actually use your phone and use the phone banking to be able to pay off your loan. I mean, the same way that you can make extra premium payments into your policy, you can do the same thing. So it's relatively easy to do that. It's certainly a lot easier than when you're trying to borrow money from the bank. Oh my gosh. Or from a mortgage broker. Oh my God. All the hoops that you have to go through for that is such a pain.
Yeah.
I have another question.
Sure, Agnes.
I have a client who has UL, and they're telling me, well, what if I got a UL that's making I know there's nothing guaranteed, but they're saying, what if I have a investment like UL that's making 4.5% or 4 to 5%?
Yeah.
Isn't that the same? Can't I borrow from that just the same?
So the challenge there with a UL is that it does go up and down. So there's no guaranteed values with a UL. So that year, yeah, you might have enough money to borrow. But the danger there and the risk, and it's actually, I believe it is written in the document that gets printed out when you do a policy delivery for a UL. There's the risk of the bank actually calling that loan. When your balance is low, if it dips because of the way the market goes, they might call that loan because they're afraid that you won't be able to pay it off. So there's that risk for that, eh? So that's one of the reasons why I really don't like the UL anymore, because the risk is not explained very well, and it needs to be explained much better. Even the death benefit on a UL is not even guaranteed.
Can you just go over that, like the death benefit? Because
Sure.
we're told
Sure.
that, yeah, it's like, oh, you're gonna have $1 million by the time you're 87. You're gonna have $2 million.
Yeah, and the way they look at that, and believe me, I've been one of those people who train people on how to do that. The calculation is they basically say on average, right? On average, yes, your values go up, stock market goes up and down, but on average, can you make 8%? And I know the calculation and how they do that. But what you really want to know is what's the actual return? What's the actual, not the average? Because average is actually easy to calculate, right? It's like if you go up 100%, down 50%, up 100%, down 50%, up 100%, down 50%. your average there is like 25% over 4 years. But how much money do you actually have after that? Zero, right? Is zero. So it's not so much the average rate of return, is what's the actual rate. So that's the thing that's not guaranteed. And contractually, the death benefit, if you don't pay, this is what's been happening. We've seen this a lot actually in the media, is that there are these horror stories where people were paying, $200 a month for their UL. And after 20 years, they want to get money from it or they want to do something and they don't have it anymore. It's nothing. There's no value in it. And it's like something happened there. There's a human error there because the agent, whoever sold it to them, didn't service them well and keep them abreast of what's happening with their policy. But on the other end of it too, is that from a technical point of view, it's the instability of the plan that is the problem. So does that make sense, Agnes?
Yes, another thing is somebody also said, well, my UL has been producing like 8% every single year, and the lowest it's been is 6%. So isn't that better than the 5% dividend if it compounds?
How long have they had it? What was their return in 2001? What was their return in 2008?
So probably, apparently it was like 6%.
It's up and down, so it's very unstable. You can't project it. No one can project it. So anecdotally, you could say, oh yeah, I've had this experience where I made this much and I've made this much over these many years. This is how much is in there. Okay. But it only takes one day where the market tanks that you lose a lot of money. Same thing, for example, people are saying, with crypto, for example, I know, for example, I have a sister-in-law who got into crypto for a while. She made a lot of money in the beginning and then said, oh, you got to get into this, And the next, 2 years later, she lost it all. And it wasn't because she was gambling, but it was because crypto tanked at the time. Then it bounced back. So if you're willing to take the risk of, getting those highs and then tanking and getting those lows, then okay, that's why you have those investor profiles. For me, I really don't have a problem with getting into that, but not a major part of your financial plan should be that. If you read anything like by Ray Dalio, for example, Tony Robbins recommended Ray Dalio, and he was like the founder of the biggest hedge fund in the world, right? He said the best ratio is you take about 10%, maximum 10% of your income, but you be ready to lose that. That's where your high risk stuff comes in. So yeah, if you have a balanced kind of diverse and balanced kind of investment profile, then yeah, you can take a percentage of that and put it in, and that percentage could be big. That 10% might be $100,000, and you want to put it into something riskier. By all means, you can do that because in terms of the ratio of your money, you're not going to lose. You're going to lose a lot there, but you're not going to lose. It's not going to break you. So it's riskable money. You can risk it. If you have that, then that's fine. And if that's your investor profile, then fine. You can do that. But most people, for example, banks don't put it in UL. I'll guarantee you that they're not putting their money in UL. Now, 2/3 of the banks in the United States, they put, I believe it's $181.2 billion of their tier one capital, meaning that's their cash, into what's called corporately owned life insurance. That's whole life policies, right? And they don't risk that. They don't gamble with that, right? So they're not putting it into UL. They're putting it into whole life. They're putting it into something that's steady, and they do that, right? So secret to being rich: don't do what the banks tell you to do. Do what the banks are actually doing, right? They tell you to put in TFSAs, RSPs, GICs. Don't do that because they don't do them themselves, right? They do buy a lot of life insurance, though.
So you wouldn't suggest getting a UL because it's a combination of life insurance and
Investment.
investment, right?
Yeah.
What is the downside to that? I thought it was better because then, not only would I have investment, it actually comes built in with life insurance, permanent life insurance.
Yeah, one of the things that's appealing about UL is that it's cheap, right? And so you can get into the game, kind of like you can get into the investment game at a very low price. That's appealing, right? But when you think of it long term, over time, I don't know, the risk seems to be, especially because you're dealing with people who don't have a lot of discretionary income, right? You're looking at people who can afford $150 to $200 a month. That's not much. So do you really want to take that kind of risk with them?
Yeah.
You have to look at it like that.
Right. It's so funny because people think that whole life is for the rich.
Yeah, they do. They think, and they have this, the misconception it's so expensive. It's like, no, it's not. Not if you design it right. And that's one of the myths I want to dispel in the next webinar when we talk about infinite banking and cash flow management with whole life. I want to dispel some of those myths about that. Cool. All right, guys, it's 8:13. 9:13 p.m. on my time. So we're a few minutes over. Want to thank you for spending time here. Robert, thank you I haven't seen you for a long time. It's so good to see you, man. You're looking good.
Last year, remember?
Yeah, I know. Great. Agnes, thanks for joining. Doreen, thank you. Jed.
I'm going to send you a message to Messenger, Mark.
Sounds good. Deb and Sam, thanks for hanging out. Right. Irene, thank you. Daniel, thanks for joining. Jed, you got anything to add to what was discussed before we leave?
No, that's good. I was distracted.
All right. Hope you had a good dinner. All right, guys, have a great night, and just reach out if you have any other questions. Reach out on Messenger or on Calendly or whatever you want to do to connect. God bless you guys.
Good night.
Take care.